I found this quote from Barth's translation of the Dhammapada, sayings of Buddha. If one should meet a mature friend, a fellow traveler, a wise companion, go with that one, overcoming all obstacles, mindful and happy. Bruce and I watched our two young sons, firstborns, grow up as very young children in the ashram in friendship, and remarkably those two, after 35 years, are still friends. And I watched my fellow traveler Bruce on television, and I jumped out of my chair as if the Bears had won the Super Bowl on national television in 1991 when it was announced that Bruce had won the Academy Award for original screenplay for the movie Ghost as a writer. It was just a moment that sticks with me. Several years later, I was one of several hundred people, friends actually of Bruce's, who gathered in Bruce's hometown of Detroit for the private opening of Bruce's movie My Life, which he both wrote and directed. And interestingly, my son and Bruce's two sons were extra actors in that movie. And it was a wonderful experience for my son. So there's been this thread of friendship that has gone on for a very long time. And, so here we all are gathered in friendship, and all of us on the same spiritual path. Now, Bruce, in addition to his very active screenwriting and movie producing and a number of things he's doing that I'm not even totally clear on, but are occupying a lot of his time. Bruce teaches meditation and spiritual practice in California and in New York, as he has for many, many years, 20, 30 years. The website for his spiritual practice is brucerubin-class.com. And I guess I'd just like to say another quote from Buddha is, having friends when you need them is a blessing. Being content with what is a blessing. Just yesterday, Bruce reminded me for about the 38th time in 38 years that being content with what is a blessing. So, I introduce to you Bruce Rubin.
Thank you very much. I really sit before you all today as what I think of as the token unenlightened, unawakened teacher. And if any of you feel that that's not worth your time, and it probably isn't, you're welcome to walk through the woods and get as much as from that as from me. But I was asked to share my journey, to come here and talk, and I know there was a selected sort of program topic, but when Bart sort of asked what I would talk about, I said I will find out when I start talking, and that's really how I live. I really have I don't prepare it because it changes in the moment, and every time I prepared something and the moment happens, it tends to be other than what I had thought it should be or would be. So this is called tightrope walking. I'm just going to start talking, and I already have started talking, and share with you what is for me a very interesting journey that involves something that I think a lot of you share, which is trying to have a spiritual life and a career, or a worldly life. And how do you do that? How do you do both? Well, in a certain sense, they are both the same thing. And for me, that realization happened fairly early on with the meeting of my teacher, Rudy. But before that, I grew up as a kid who only wanted to be in movies. I love movies. I thought, what a great thing. How do you get into movies? And I don't think there's a doorway into movies. It's really one of the strange elements of Hollywood. They don't open any doors. So I learned somewhere along the way that the only way you get in is through the crack at the bottom. So you have to prostrate yourself pretty low to crawl in and find your way into that environment. Nowadays they have awards you can win that make people aware of you, but in those days they really had very little. And I never had a sense of how this was going to happen. But luckily, before Hollywood happened for me, and I spent many years trying to approach it without success, in the mid-'60s, I realized I have nothing to write about. I have no stories to tell. How am I going to have a career as a filmmaker without having stories? And that was a real problem. Whenever I would sit down to write, I would take out a tablet of paper and I would start putting my pen on the pad, and then I would end up drawing. Not very good drawings, but just anything. Because I couldn't find words. I couldn't find what I had to say to anybody. And that was very hard for me. And I thought, I'll never be able to go to Hollywood because I have nothing to say. And then in the middle of the 60s, a good friend of mine was a friend of Tim Leary's. You can probably tell where this is going, but Tim Leary... Tim Leary had a supplier from England, Michael Hollingshead, I believe was his name, who was bringing some pure lysergic acid from England, from Osley Labs actually in Switzerland, to Millbrook, and asked my friend Barry if he could leave them in my refrigerator overnight before he went up to Millbrook. And it just happened to be the day that I had planned for 6 months to have as my first LSD trip. And so when this little pill that I've been carrying around for years, the little LSD tab, failed to activate, my friend Barry said, well, we happen to have this jar of pure LSD in the refrigerator. I'll get you a drop. So he goes and takes a little syringe, and he fills the entire syringe and goes to give me the drop. Unfortunately, the entire syringe full of LSD went into my throat, so thousands and thousands of micrograms went surging down my throat. And so began a very major life-transforming experience. It's as close to enlightenment as I have ever been. And may well have passed enlightenment on some level. People asked me how long it lasted, and I kept trying to figure out whether it was 3 or 4 billion years. I wasn't really sure. But at the very end of it, after a millennia of fighting it, which I did with a great deal of vibrancy, I did not want to be dismantled and disassembled and brought into nothingness. So I created a world of absolute hell on Earth and not on Earth. As I went through this dismantling, it was pretty awful. But in the end, it won. It won. It took me apart completely, molecule by molecule was the way I experienced it. And each molecule had a vast history of its own. So I had a lot of unraveling to do. But I remember ending up as absolutely nothing, complete nothing. And it had no quality. I couldn't describe it as a color. I couldn't describe it as a feeling. It just was nothing. But which was, and it was okay. I mean, there was like a huge okayness about it, and there was no me at all. So there was just being. And then somewhere in the middle of that, I heard what I can only describe as like a plop, like something plopping in water. And whatever it is I was, when it divided in half, 4, 8, 16, 32, you know the numbers. And I watched Bruce, who had been there before this long 4 billion year process, reassemble. But I didn't reassemble just as a body, but the world as I knew it reformed itself. So the entire room that I had been in, the universe that surrounded it, connections to what I will call narrative, story, my life, all came back to me. And there I was. And my response to all of that was unbelievable laughter. I laughed, like I called it a bear laugh, for like half an hour. Such joy in being back. And then began a multi-year questioning and journey in which I had to say, what was that? What happened to me? And what do I do now? which is very common, I'm told, for people who have awakened. And I can't say that I had awakened, although I can't say I hadn't. I just know that I knew something that I had never known before, that the universe was bigger, vaster, and more other than anything I had ever experienced or imagined it could be. So a dear friend of mine gave me the Bhagavad Gita and said, read this. And I read it, and I said, if I had read this a day before, I would not have understood it at all. Reading it this day, I understood it. By understand, I mean it made sense. It spoke to me in a really profound way. I understood there was a journey that was not mine alone, that it was ancient, it was vast, it was eternal, and I was on it. That was powerful for me. I really also knew that I would have stories to tell. And that's when I began to sense that my life would be probably on a two-pronged road. That I wanted to have a career, I wanted still to write movies, and more than anything, I wanted to understand my journey. So I got a job at NBC working as a editor in the film department, in the news department, and would go downstairs and talk on radio about why LSD was going to save the world. And then horrible things happened with people taking LSD, and I realized it was going to be criminalized pretty quickly and I should shut up. So I got very, very quiet. And so I ended up saying, I've got to go to India and find a teacher. So I began this journey to India. I took off from NBC. I just began hitchhiking, really, and ended up living in a monastery, a Tibetan monastery in Nepal. I spent a year and a half meeting all sorts of remarkable people, having many stories occur. I remember I was in the desert of Afghanistan, sleeping in a 3-room sand-built hut with no roof and no third wall, and looking up at the sky and knowing that stories were coming. I just knew it. I could feel them, and I didn't know what they were, but I just felt assured. Everything about that journey was miraculous and fascinating, and I could spend the rest of today talking about it, but I'm not going to. Essentially, I came back to America with a number of Tibetan carpets that I was going to try to sell for the Tibetans I had lived with, because they were all, every one of them, impoverished, not that long after their escape from Tibet, really. And I took them to a store around the corner from where I lived, which was an antique store of Oriental art run by a guy named Rudy, who I had actually met once before. I had once gone into his store looking for a Buddha. I've told this story many times, forgive me if you've all heard it, but I remember walking over to a little case. I had $3 to spend. And I saw this case of tiny little Buddhas, and I was drawn dramatically to one of them. And but it was broken, so I just kept dismissing it. And then I finally went to this big, heavy-set guy named Rudy, very angelic character. And I said, I'm looking for a Buddha. He said, well, how much do you have to spend? I said, $3. He was not dismayed by that. He said, oh, come over here. And he goes over to the case and pulls out the broken Buddha. And I said, yeah, I really like that one a lot. I looked at it, but it's broken. And he said, search for perfection in yourself, not in external objects. I said, boy, that is the best sales pitch I ever heard. And I gave him $3, and that Buddha traveled with me, has been with me forever, and it went around the world with me. And when I came back, I took the carpets to his shop. And he asked where I'd been. I said, I'd been in India looking for a teacher. He said, did you find one? I said, no. And he said, well, I can teach you everything you want to know. And I knew it was true. I absolutely knew that it was true. I don't know how I knew, but I did. And I began studying with him. That evening, I met the woman who was to become my wife. So it was an amazing day. I don't know about astrology really, but things lined up in a remarkable way. And I studied with Rudy for many years. And he taught a practice of what's known as Kundalini Yoga, which was very much involved with Shaktipat. His guru was a man named Swami Nityananda from India, whose other major disciple was Swami Muktananda. And Rudy studied with Muktananda for a while and then broke with him. The first kind of Stalinist purge I've ever experienced, where a teacher leaves another teacher. it was kind of unpleasant, but I learned a great deal from Rudy becoming Rudy and watching him in the world. Rudy's real belief was, this is your spiritual life. You're living it. You don't have to leave the world. You don't live in a cave. You don't have to give up anything that isn't given up of its own. You just live your life. And he was enormously supportive of my having a career as a writer or as a Hollywood person. And even though that wasn't happening yet, he just understood that somehow was part of my completion as a human being. And so all the years I was studying with Rudy, I had this extraordinary sense of wanting, as he used to put it, to grow. It was all about growing and attaining and getting somewhere in a sense that you're not. And so for years and years, I would practice this very deep, powerful, energetic meditation, always reaching to get somewhere and never getting there. And in the process of not getting there, feeling in a certain sense that I was doing it wrong or that I was some kind of a failure. That if I was as strong as Rudy, I would arrive at this place. And just to continue the spiritual line here, Rudy passed away only 7 years after I met him. So I lived in an ashram. I left my career. I had a career as a museum curator in New York, where I was the head of the film department at the Whitney Museum. And I said to myself, when Rudy died, I need my spiritual life more than I need this career. And I gave up the Whitney and moved to Indiana, where I met Larry and continued my studies with another teacher in the same mode as Rudy, which was, again, work hard, work in the world, and grow. And at some point, I broke with that organization because long stories, which I'm filled with narratives, but I'm going to skip most of them and give you the core ones. I broke with that and began teaching on my own. And I started teaching what I knew. And that teaching was powerful for me. It allowed me to sit in an energetic relationship with students and experience connectivity and flow. I thought there was something magical about it, but one of the key elements is not magical at all. It's looking at somebody. Just looking. And looking at another person with your eyes open is such a simple human experience. And there is such power in that, especially if you're sitting with someone who is loving and embracing and allowing. And Rudy had been that for me. If you sit on a subway in New York and you look at somebody's eyes, they may kill you after a second and a half. You have to be very careful. It's very confrontational. But when you sit with someone you really care about, and you have an eyes open glance, barriers fall away, connection occurs, duality for a few moments isn't there. So this practice that I did was a eyes open meditation with a lot of students, and I learned over time how to connect with many variables in many kinds of people, and it was a great flowering for me of an ability to work energetically with other people. But my teaching continued to be get somewhere, grow, work, effort. And then a number of occurrences happened. One is I took a class in a Vipassana yoga retreat for 10 days of silence and sitting. And after 4 days, I said, I can't do this anymore. I hated it. I hated every minute of sitting all day long. I had a sciatic nerve that was on fire, and I thought I was failing the sitting class. And I went to the people who were in charge, and I said, I'm sorry, but I'm quitting. I'm leaving. I'm going home. And they said, Bruce, you're like a patient on an operating table, and all of the stitches and all of the syringes and everything else are coming out of your belly. You can't walk away at this moment. You've got to finish this operation. It seemed like a compelling idea, and so I said, okay. I took my suitcase and went back to the room, and I sat for the next few days and finished the class, which never got any sweeter for me at all. But on the last day, I met a guy who had been doing these. He's done 40 retreats, some of them 30 and 60 and 90 days. And I thought this was crazy, personally. But we were allowed to talk on the last day, and he told me he only goes to these things because, not that he believes in the Vipassana retreat so much, but in the opportunity to just sit and just be quiet. And it's very meaningful to him. And he started talking about a teacher that he had had named Ramesh Balsekar, who was a student of somebody named Nisargadatta Maharaj. And I would never have heard of Nisargadatta if I hadn't sat for 10 days. So I understood there was something working here and something pushing me through. And Nisargadatta basically says, in a way, that there's nothing to do. You all must know Nisargadatta because he's probably, in his book, I Am That, one of the best exponents, I think, of the kind of work that's being spoken about here. Nisargadatta changed my life. And the road to Nisargadatta, for me, was a direct line and wonderful and meaningful. And then I met Eckhart Tolle, and I took 2 seminars with him. I have a house upstate New York, which is about a 5-minute walk from the Omega Institute. And he just happened to be there, and I thought, well, he's in my backyard. And I watched Eckhart walk into this room and sit down with 500 people. And he was something that I experienced with Rudy, but it was different. He was present. He was just present. And I don't think I have ever understood the word presence before. I didn't articulate it to myself. And he spoke and he said a lot of things, but the ones that really registered for me were, nothing you're looking for is in the future, and there's nothing to attain. You're already that which you're looking for. Well, I'd heard these things back in the 60s. I'd heard of Ramana Maharshi and other people speaking of them, but they made no sense because how could I, this imperfect, angry, neurotic Jewish kid from Detroit, be that which I'm looking for? It made no sense in the early days, and now it was starting to make sense. And my practice really changed dramatically. And I started to understand that whenever I meditated and went off into these wonderful, extraordinary spaces, I always came back to this. That after LSD, wherever it took me, I came back to this. Somehow I couldn't get rid of this. And then I went, oh, this is it. It's so simple. And for some reason, I'm at war with this. And I couldn't figure out why. Why was I at war with it? And so my entire practice started to become accepting me as I am, accepting this as it is. Rudy had taught about that. He taught about surrender. And I began to understand surrendering to what is was an extraordinary practice. And it has become my essential work at this moment, to the extent that I was getting nervous about coming here because I thought, what do I have to say to anybody here? I just felt, as I often can, that you guys know everything I have to say. And for me to sit in front of you seemed to be unbelievably arrogant on some level. And I was very nervous about it. And I was sitting with my son and telling him how anxious I was. He said, Dad, you should meditate and just calm yourself down. And I said, no, I'm going to live with what is here. I'm going to live with my anxiety. I'm going to live with what is, because there's a reason for it. And I have no idea what the reason is. I don't need to change what is. I just need to be it. What's come for me over the years of recognizing presence, or what is the loss of narrative, in my life. When I sit with my students, and I am now increasingly conscious of this, there's nothing leading up to this moment, and there's nothing following it. It is complete and absolute. And I sit there in a state of wonder and gratitude, and I watch it happen. I don't even watch it. It just happens. And I just am it. I can't understand it on any level. If I try to understand it, it's separation from it. So I don't try to understand it. I just try to be. And again, trying to be is absurd, so I just this. And so coming here today, I walked in the room and brought nothing at all, because I had nothing to bring other than to sit down and be. And so there is a part of me, the narrative Bruce, that worries. And then there's the part of Bruce that has nothing to do with Bruce exactly, which just is, that always arises. It's always there. And expresses itself when it needs to in its own terms. And I have learned to trust that. Not completely, obviously, because I was anxious about coming. But I find that very interesting, that anxiety was there. And I said, well, it must have a purpose. It is. So I just came anxiety-ridden and sat down before you to be in this moment. And what's interesting is we're all in this moment. Where else are you? So there's something of a shared oneness that is empty of us and only present. And arriving at that presence without being enlightened is a really interesting thing. Because for the 92% of us in the room who maybe aren't enlightened, it's a way to live. You don't have to sit and just wait for enlightenment. You can pretend. You can live this near enlightenment state of just being with an act of enormous trust, enormous okay. And when you do that, extraordinary things occur. This is where my career comes in. My entire career has been an act of it arriving. Because I, Bruce Rubin, have zero, and I mean zero, talent. I do not know how to write. I do not know how to write a screenplay. I do not know how to tell a story. I truly don't know how to do it. But it happens. And it has kept happening. It won an Oscar. It satisfied something of the narrative drama. I desperately, as an 8-year-old, wanted to win an Oscar. I mean, I made speeches in the shower forever. But there was no road. There was no road to getting an Oscar. How does the universe work to manipulate that kind of event and make that happen? It's such a singular thing. And yet it did. It did. And I watched it happen. It delayed itself. I didn't have a career till I was in my 40s. So every time I tried to have a career, it didn't happen. Every attempt I made, something went to undercut it. And most people I know whose careers don't happen till their 40s have given up on their careers, or on those careers. But I had no choices. I realized I had two talents, I thought. One was that I could write. I could actually put words on paper, and the other is I could type. And typing just didn't do it as a support mechanism. Although I tried, I actually worked as an temp on a number of occasions. But writing was something I had to do, and I did not give up. I just kept working. I kept at it. And scripts arrive in different ways, and how they arrive and how they manifest is a great tutorial in spiritual practice. The first script I wrote, there's so many stories here that I'll cut them back, but the first script I wrote was a movie called Brainstorm, and the first one that got made. And I remember going to Hollywood after I was in my 40s, and having to pay my way to go to watch them shooting my movie, and standing on the set and watching Christopher Walken destroy every line I had written, absolutely rewrite it on the spot. Said, I don't like this, I don't know, but I kept going, you can't change that line. That line means everything for the scene over here and the scene over there. He changed everything. And I was pretty annoyed. And then in an awful situation, Natalie Wood, who was starring in the movie, died the day after I left. And the movie almost died. And David, who's here as a partner of the director of that film, and Doug Trumbull, and Doug did this heroic thing. He took all the negative for the film and locked himself in the vault and said, nobody's going to touch this negative unless I finish this movie. And the studio had to do it. And so Lloyd's of London gave us money. The movie was finished, and the movie came out, and it had a real life. It was a living thing. I had such joy in seeing this movie on the screen, and then it didn't make any money. And I realized very early on in Hollywood that a movie that doesn't make money is like a child who died. You don't talk about it. It's just not there. So I had come all this way and had a movie made, and it had not furthered anything. Nothing. That was the beginning of my disappointments in the reality of Hollywood, the fantasy of Hollywood. Then I sat down and started writing a movie called Jacob's Ladder. It was the first movie I ever wrote that was delivered. By delivered, I mean I had nothing to do with it. I sat at the typewriter and I just went, and I just typed as fast as I could because it was just coming through. There it was, and I was like blown away by it. And then I got stuck in the middle, and I didn't know what to do. And I remember just puzzling and walking around and not knowing how to break through this movie and having this enormous frustration that I didn't know what to do with it. And then this thunderbolt of awareness came through. And it said, you are making the feature-length version of An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which is a great Ambrose Bierce short story and a wonderful movie. And I said, oh, that's what I'm doing. And the movie completed itself. And at the same time that I wrote that script, well, actually it took 10 years almost for that movie to get made. After that, I wrote a treatment for a film called Ghost. And I wrote the treatment for Ghost, and I showed it to my wife. And all of my treatments up to that point had all looked like novels. This treatment was very spare and very simple. And my wife looked at it and said, this is a movie. And that's when I finally understood what a movie was, how simple they really were. And Ghost, when I finally got to Hollywood, you don't just have somebody give you money to write a movie. You have to go around and what they call pitch the movie. And pitching is a particular experience. And the anxiety level of walking in a room with a studio president and having to hold their attention for a period of time and convince them to give you all of this money to write something is very intense. And in the beginning, I was like this. And a very good friend of mine told me about what a pitch meeting he went to and went into the meeting, and they said, so tell us your story. And he passed out. But that's exactly what it's like. It's really, you're fighting for your life, and you got to talk. You've got to talk, and you've got to sell verbally something that isn't yet there, isn't yet formed. And I spent 2 years pitching Ghost, and everybody kept saying no, that they weren't interested. And then the pitch started getting richer and richer, and I became more and more connected to it. And the final week, I was surrendered. And I went into 5 producers' offices, and every one of them said, yes, we want to do this. It was amazing. One woman started crying when I told the story, and I said, she's the one I'm going to go with, and she produced the movie. And writing Ghost was a collaborative experience and amazing to me, because I always thought as a writer I had to have all the answers, and what I've learned really early on in Hollywood is nobody has the answers. Nobody knows how it works. A movie just happens, and it happens through people guessing and trying and manipulating and moving things around until you all go, ah, there it is. And it doesn't matter who has the great idea. It doesn't matter if it's you or somebody else, because the film is what you're working on. It's not you. I mean, I've worked with people who give me an idea for a movie who actually want something on the screen. When their line comes up, they want a little something on the screen saying that was their line. You don't want to work with people like that. What you really want is to be with people who are deeply, deeply committed to the project. And we worked on Ghost, and it was magical. It was wonderful from day one, from the moment my wife said this is a movie to the Oscar, and it continues. In fact, actually, I'm turning it into a Broadway musical right now, and it's more fun even than the movie. It's one of the greatest pleasures ever. But the great thing about Ghost was how rich, how full, how gifted I felt in that movie. Then, the rest of the movies. The universe doesn't deliver on a regular basis. It does all sorts of strange things. One of them is to give you the idea and then to disappear. And there you are, having maybe, if you're lucky, been paid to write this thing, and there is no help. Nothing at all. And you sit down to write, and you're doing it. And you know, when you're doing the writing, it's like shit. It looks awful. It smells. It has no flavor. It's nothing that you are proud of, and you don't know what to do about it. And you just keep working and you keep praying. And in my life, a number of things have happened. Literally, the script My Life, which was a movie that I directed and wrote, I kept writing it, and the producers kept saying, it's not working. It's not working. And I went, I don't know what to do. I simply don't know what to do. And I went on a trip to Africa with my family, which was, if you're ever stuck in life and don't know what's next, go on a safari. It's an amazing thing. It's Garden of Eden on a certain level. You really get to see how this all works, where you are not, where you're part of the food chain, basically, and you feel very different about life after time in Africa. But I came back from that and I said, Bruce, you've got 1 week. If you don't figure out the ending of this movie or how to make this movie work, you have to abandon it completely. And I had done all of my best work, everything I could do, and it wasn't working. And I went to sleep one night begging for help. And I had a dream. And in the dream, a character appeared in the movie that had never been there before. If any of you have seen the movie, it's Michael Keaton and Nicole Kidman. And Michael Keaton's character is dying of cancer and discovers he's about to have a child, his first child, and that he will not live long enough to meet this child. So he decides to make a videotape about his life to leave for the child so the child knows something about him. But the problem is when he starts to make the videotape is he realizes he doesn't have a clue who he is. So he doesn't even know what to put on tape. It's a rather, I actually like the movie a lot. But in the process of the movie, it wasn't gelling. It was just kind of sentimental and it didn't have much core element. And the character that emerged for me was a healer named Dr. Ho, or Mr. Ho. And this healer would appear to me every night for 5 days, and each time would reveal a scene. And I got to the end of the scenes, and I realized that my character still died, but he was completely healed. He had come to find himself in all of the journey that he was on. And that without those 5 scenes with the healer, the movie didn't work. And they were delivered. They were completely delivered to me. And everybody read the script the week after I put that in, and everyone said, this is the movie we're making. So I know from whence grace comes. Almost every movie I've ever done has begun as a dream. Jacob's Ladder started as a dream. My life started as a dream. I actually had eaten some kind of, I'm going to guess Mexican food that didn't sit well. and I woke up and I thought, I'm dying. And what if I was having a child and that child wasn't going to be around? And what a great idea for a movie. So that's really literally how the movie came. But I woke up from this experience and the awareness was there. In my life pitching movies, going into the studios and trying to sell this project, I have learned one of the greatest lessons from my spiritual practice. What I do now when I go into a studio is I do what I do when I walk into this room, which is I try to show up, to be present. It's scary on some level because you don't know what's going to happen, guys. You have no idea. Your life is on the line. Your livelihood is on the line. Maybe not your life. And you have to trust it. And that's all I do now, is I walk in the room and I sit down and I ask for a cup of tea. And I have a cup of tea and it's put on the table in front of me. And there is that moment that comes, so tell me your story. And that alone creates presence. Everyone in the room is present. And then I begin to talk. And I say I, and it sounds like it's Bruce, but there is something talking. And I was with the president of Warner Brother Television, and I was going in to pitch a television show. And I had just come up with the idea. I hadn't even finished the whole thing. I had to go into the room and pitch it the next day. I couldn't remember from beginning to end what the whole story was. I just couldn't hold it together. And I went to bed that night and I was like, oh, how's this going to work? And a voice came to me in the middle of the night and it said, tell them your life story. I didn't understand it at all. But I have always been very good at paying attention. So I walked in the room with Peter, and there's something like 13 people, executives, all taking notes and listening. It's not an easy environment. And I had to begin to pitch this idea. And I said, I had a dream last night. And something said to tell you my life story. So here it is. And I started telling them much of what I just told you, including the LSD trip and everything else, and then let it lead into the story of this TV series, because it was a very spiritually driven TV series. And it just talked itself through. And at the end, Peter looked at me and said, Bruce, whatever anybody offers you for this, I will top it. I didn't know how that happened. It just happened. Recently I went into a meeting, the chairman of a major studio. Again, same situation. Very uncertain. Just all I could do, I sat outside the office for a few minutes and just said, okay, here I am. Walked in the room, had my tea, looked at her very directly, and I started to pitch the story, and she started crying. This woman, if you knew her, has never cried in her life. But and she was deeply embarrassed by it, and she bought the movie on the spot. On the spot. I'm actually going into a meeting next week with Monster. I've got to be careful what I say. It's going to be one of the toughest meetings for a script I've already written that this person wants to hear. The story of it can very easily dismiss and just say, sorry, I don't like the idea. I've already written the movie. The only way this will work, the only way anything works, is being present. And the lesson that is being taught here in this environment is that there is consistency of effort that has to be made. If I didn't have the effort made to come up with the story, to prove these ideas, to kind of create the concept, I couldn't walk in the room. But the minute I get in the room, I have to let go of everything. Everything. All the security, all the knowing, all the awareness, and just be and let it happen. It's proving to me to be an extraordinary way to live. And one of the things that started to happen for me was that my wife and I had owned 2 houses. She wants to live in one house, and I want to live in the other house. And we had started for several years she would live in the upstate house in New York in the winter, and I would live in the LA house because it was warm and I had my career there. And it was becoming divisive and becoming problematic, and we ended up going to a therapist. And at the therapist, we were trying to figure out how do we resolve this irresolvable question: where to live, how to be. And probably all of you think, where's the problem, or you don't. But it was a real tension for us. And it finally came down to the fact that one of us had to change. Very clearly. And that my wife wasn't going to be that one. It was an extraordinary thing. And I said, well, I have to change. And my teacher, Rudy, had this wonderful line. He said, judge the success of your spiritual life by the happiness of the people around you. It's a really interesting idea. And I realized my wife's not happy. And she is, in a sense, half of my daily experience. What do? I have to make her happy. I have to find her. And so part of this thing of being the one to change, the prescription was very simple. Make my wife happy. And what do I do to do that? Well, I had to start looking at all the little incremental elements of our life and see what is it that I can do. And this sense of presence began to instruct me in what to do. So in the morning, she would get up and let the dogs out. So I decided I would get up and let her sleep and let the dogs out. And then when I was downstairs, I thought, well, I can empty the dishwasher. And there were just all these things that I started to be able to do. And she would wake up and go, wow, thank you. And the next thing I know, she started doing these little things, like I would discover she left my teapot out with the cup and the tea bag sitting there. And I looked at that and I went, the silent exchange of kindness and compassion and awareness of each other. It was really exquisitely beautiful. And then this thing would come up and we'd say, well, I just did this for her, now she should do this for me. And I thought, wow, that's a danger. That's a very dangerous place to get to spiritually, expecting quid pro quo in anything you're doing. And so watching that arise, I had to really cut back from that, and I had to do with no expectation of anything. And I had to keep this going. It couldn't be a temporary or an occasional expression of making her happy. It had to be with how I live. Trying to think about somebody else before you is not something we're used to. We tend to think of ourselves in a funny way first. And one of the things you begin to realize when you start to accept things as they are and really try to let someone else be primary is how much you don't do that. And that was really amazing to me, how often my ego was expressing itself, how often I wanted life to be different than it was, how much I needed endlessly to change the moment. So I tried this experiment of not changing anything and watch what happens. If you want to see ego at work, try that. Watch what happens when you just accept it exactly as it is over and over and over and over. This
little voice in you gets very aggravated because it wants the window rolled down. It wants to leave 5 minutes earlier. It wants life to be other than what it is all the time. And when you become aware of that through your own inner sort of awareness, through your desire to make somebody else happy, to live this life of openness and surrender, you understand what Rudy would call spiritual work. For those of us who are unenlightened and unawakened, for whom this does not happen naturally, this is a practice. It's a way of living. The way of living is be present. Put others' happiness before your own. Recognize what's in front of you and do it. And do it in that moment. Don't wait for the next week to do it. Do it now. But if you do something wrong, let me talk quickly about the idea of rewriting. In Hollywood, you write something and then you rewrite it, and you rewrite it often many times. But the great gift of rewriting is you can make something better. Your life is a story. It's a story, and if it's not going well, rewrite it. Go back and change the thing that needs to be changed. You can't always go way into the past. You can change the immediate thing that didn't go well. I had a moment the other day where I said something that I think disturbed somebody, and I felt really bad about it. And about an hour later, I just called them and apologized. A minor thing perhaps, but that apology was so valuable in our dialogue because I made something that had been broken, or I thought was broken, at least in me, had caused me aggravation. I brought it back, I rewrote the script. I turned it around quickly, and it was beautiful. And the third act of a movie, and a lot of you are just in your second act, but the third act, which I happen to be in, is where a lot of the real big stuff happens. And all of the second act is obstacle, guys. All the second act is you want something desperately and you can't have it. The third act is getting what you want, but after only unbelievable effort and trial and error. And what happens in the third act of a movie is you really start to understand the rules, you understand what you can do, and then you find yourself unable to do it. You're not up to the task. Every hero's journey has a hero arriving at the end of his rope, and he doesn't know what to do. That's every movie you've ever watched, honestly. You don't know what to do, and then something happens. Something changes within you. Something comes from somewhere else. It's called Deus Ex Machina in the worst of writing circumstances. The best ones seem to arise from within, where the lesson is learned. You find that you do have the energy, you do have the power, you have the insight to make the change that releases you from the pattern of your potential failure. And you arrive at triumph. At the end of any life, a heroic life ends in triumph. And it ends in triumph of arriving at what you need. And everyone here in this room knows what we need, what you're looking for. Everyone in this room is looking for this transcendence. And in truth, every movie you've ever seen, people are looking for the same thing, but in terms or language that Hollywood embraces and spirituality doesn't. But in Hollywood terms, arriving at the thing you need is the most satisfying thing that can possibly happen. In the movie Ghost, you may want Sam and Molly to end up together, but it can't happen. He's dead, he's a ghost, she's alive. He's not coming back. He needs to save her. He doesn't know how. Everything in the movie is about learning how to do it, and a lot of obstacles to that happening, and finally finding the strength and the power to do battle. And in the very end, what he does is he tells Molly, I love you, and says the words he had not been able to say just moments before he was killed. And that's what he needed to do, and in that moment he achieved completion and was able to go and leave this world behind. We all need that. We all need to do the thing that we need to do to make our story work, to get to the end of our narrative. And whatever that takes inside you is a huge leap of some kind of trust, faith, willingness to go to the unknown place and to give yourself over to it. And the best preparation for that is to live every moment as though it's that moment. Because it might be. That's probably better talk than what I'm going to do. What I'm trying to get at, and I think this is really the core thing, spiritual life, the story of your life, the story of career, it's all one thing. It's all one thing, and we're all living the same journey. All of us are living this extraordinary, full-bodied, complicated, remarkable experience of being alive. And when we start to let go of our narrative and just get really quiet, we can see the journey for what it is. When you are looking through your own eyes and the narrative of your personality and the past and the history that you have, you don't see it clearly. You can make a lot of mistakes, and you can create a lot of havoc in your life. Having the opportunity to sit still, to have your cup of tea, to be present, to feel, to look people in the eye, to know that you can rewrite your story, to know that it's all happening in this moment, to know that it's real, to touch the enormity of gravity that comes out of gratitude of being, the incredible weight of presence, the truth of being is what we live for. And it informs, it guides, it directs, and it gives us our lives. And it will give you your material life, it will give you your spiritual life, it will give you your awakening. And until it gives it to you, live it. Live it. Practice it. Pretend. Be the person who helps and loves and gives to other people. Be a person who can get quiet inside. And be the person who is ready for the awakening when that awakening occurs.
You're up for it. I'm sure people would like to ask.
If there's anybody who has questions. Yes.
What's the TV series you were the one with spiritual, had a spiritual?
It actually it didn't get made.
Oh, it didn't get made?
No, which is not uncommon.
Okay.
It was called Chrysalis, and it had a lot of, it was virtually before Lost, but it had elements of what Lost is about. And it would have been an extraordinary spiritual journey. And but like many things, I mean, I have more scripts on the shelf than on the screen. They don't happen on your time frame or your terms. They just happen when they have to. And I just have learned, you write them and you let go.
If you don't mind me sharing, when I was with you in California, you shared seriously? You shared a story with me. Am I good?
Yeah.
It was a really profound experience for me. You shared about finding the love within you during your journey. And you told me about meeting your wife, which was amazing. And I remember that stuck with me like the last, I think it's been a year, right? And I didn't really know at the moment what you meant about, I know we all have love, and I know we experience love within ourselves, and finding that. But I remember those words you kept telling me, it just happened. And you had so much of it in you that you were ready to give it. And then it vibrated to you. So I just wanted to share that because I thought that was just such an amazing experience at the moment. And really affected me with that.
I can only talk a moment about this idea of love, but it's an important idea. I have a very big heart chakra and a lot of capacity to love. And I hug everybody, which a lot of people think of as very Hollywood, but it's really just it's me. Forgive me if I've been hugging you and you're feeling uptight about that. That's my first reaction to people is to hug them. But I really do believe this practice that we're all in, or whatever you want to call it, has to be a full-bodied experience. And it concerns me a little bit is to keep it in the head, to keep it as intellectual. And I know that some of the conversation here I sometimes feel has a very heady quality to it. Even when I sit with people, I sense that you're processing, trying to get it. And one of the things I loved about the Kundalini Yoga experience of dealing with the chakras is that energy has to come down. It's got to move. It's got to be in your heart. It's got to be in your gut. It's got to be in your sex chakra. It's got to be full body, at least in my sense of things. Without that, it is it's not total. It's not complete. And that there's a real tendency in a lot of us to want to live it, to have a safe spiritual experience, meaning just have it up here. And I just warn you, maybe the wrong word, alert you to, if that's happening, give yourself over to love somehow. Find a way to bring that love into your experience of spirituality, because it is a deeply, deeply affecting experience. That really being deeply present it's not limited to your brain.
Bruce, you gave such a great talk.
Check it back in a second.
That has been the feeling that I have been struggling for quite some time too, that that which we call spirituality to me would not be a spirituality if it is life negative, if it does not embrace the totality of the life. And to me it has been that the heart has a lot easier way to there than the mind or the brain. And all that 20, 30, 40 years of whatever I have come across has done is to come down from the head to the heart and feel it more and more often. And it's a lot easier access to beyond from there than being in the head situation. And the discussion or reading has been of worth only to the extent that it brings you to that level to me.
You and I are in agreement on that. To me, I have had a very full life. I have had almost every dream that I've ever wanted to come true, which is pretty amazing. My enlightenment or awakening, when that occurs, will not be from a nightmare. It will be from the most beautiful life I could have imagined. And I recommend that path, whatever that is. Not everybody gets that ride. But I don't think enlightenment can be or should be an escape from life. Because from everything I've learned from Bart, you're still alive. It's still there, even after enlightenment. Somewhere along the line, this wholeness needs, I think, to emerge. I'm speaking again as an unenlightened person, so I may be wrong about this, but it seems to me valuable to find a way into a good third act, to have a full life. A good third act doesn't mean you get the girl. A good third act means you get what you need. You have completion. You can have a terrible life that leads you finally to enlightenment, and that will be so much what you need that everything that went before it will have been exactly necessary and right because it brought you wholeness. But if you don't get to that, what is your life been about? And what is your life if it's a good life? What's it like if it's a good life and it ends with no realization? It's the poem that Art read last night. It's meaningless. So you had a good life. I know a lot of people having very good lives with no consciousness, no presence, no awareness, no appreciation. To me, awakening seems to me to be the only culmination worth the journey. But it isn't given to many people, for whatever reason. So pursuing it seems to be very valuable. But living the life of a pursuer, of a seeker, seems to me to be much more important than just having a life. It's such a rich, wonderful, day-to-day presence. So, again, I'll share again what you just said. Make it whole. Live it whole. Love the whole thing.
This may be ridiculous, but it seems to me that your description of presence and whole body awareness, acting from silence or waiting for appropriateness, is as good a description as anything I've read or heard anywhere. I'm just wondering what's informing you that you're not in presence or you're not enlightened, or whatever word you want to use. It seems like you're living your life, more than as if in order to achieve a goal. It seems like it's an authentic way of living and being presence.
I don't know what awakening is, other than the fact that, the LSD trip was certainly mind-bending on many levels. I don't know the answer to that question. I just know that it's possible to be who I am and live this life without the final snap that Bart keeps responding to or relating to. And I'm very happy. I would love that to happen, obviously. Although I get the sense that if I really wanted it to happen, it would happen. So I don't quite know what my responsibility is in that regard. But what I'm trying to do is live as if, which is how I started the talk today. Live as if. It's not that hard. It's very doable, and it's really beautiful. And if it's almost like living a totally awakened life, then you can do it right now. Why wait for the enlightenment to come? Why walk around being miserable and sorry for yourself and all for yourself? You don't have to. Make somebody else happy. You can even make yourself happy. Maybe make that your priority. Make yourself happy. Love somebody. Hug somebody. It's just not that hard. You live this existence, in my mind, as such a gift. I can't see life as anything but a gift. I don't see it as something to be gotten out of. One of my problems with enlightenment is that it's not this, or that it's reaching for something that's not this. And I go, whoa, no, this is it. This is it. I don't know what else to say. This is it. I love this. Period. And if enlightenment adds to that or becomes part of this is it, that's a great thing. If enlightenment doesn't become part of it, I haven't lost, I don't think. But again, what do I know?
Ask you a question.
What's your take on letting go? Because the notion people talk about with enlightenment, eventually you're gonna have everything you love and care about is gonna be taken away. What about letting go of everything you care about?
Well,
I mean, the notion you just shared of love, you know what I mean?
It may be why I'm not enlightened, because I love it. I love everything in my life. And letting go of it is, for me, somewhat fearsome. I was thinking about it last night, lying in bed, you know. And I'm not afraid of death so much as I'm afraid of, I love this creation. I love everybody in it. It's been an amazingly, not completely joyful ride, because it's been full of struggles and stuff. You do have to let go of it. Here's what I know. When I sit and when I sit and read, especially when I'm teaching, there is nothing that precedes it. Truly, my narrative and story just isn't there. I'm not thinking about it. It's true for everybody, even at this moment. Most of you are not sitting around saying, when I was born, and then this happened to me, and that happened to me. You're not doing that right now. You're just here. Yeah, I mean, nobody here is lost, maybe a few people, but most people are not lost in the story right now. And I'm not projecting what's going to happen when I'm done with anything. I'm just here. And the better part of that is sitting around in the present, and there's nothing to lose. What can be lost? I mean, that's the sense of it. You're just there. And you're always just where else are we in the end? But right here. And not only that, we're really happy to be here. It's incredibly comfortable and joyous, unless it's not. And if it's not, then it's not. It's like when my son said, Dad, you should meditate. I said, no. I'm going to be anxious. Because I am anxious. And there's nothing wrong with it, as far as I can tell. I don't like it, but there's nothing wrong with that either. It's just you don't like it. And I'd rather it be like art. And when that occurs for me, then that will be what occurs. But until it does, here we are. And it's okay. You know, and I mean, I felt like an idiot being so worried about coming here to talk. But I knew that's what I was worried. And here we are doing exactly what I expected to happen. I sat down and I started talking. Some of it I hope has been meaningful or valuable, and some of it has not. But that's just the way it works. And you know, everyone will take away from today or tomorrow what they need, and from yesterday what they need to take. And my feeling is, you know, Rudy said he wouldn't let us ever write anything down. And he said, don't even listen to me while I talk. Just let it come in. Just let it come in. He said, if you need to hear it, it will come up when you need to hear it. And that has been the absolute proof of my life, the absolute magic of my life. I'll tell you one quick story. I was pretty horrified by the killing fields of Africa. I thought it was like a Walt Disney movie, you know. I thought when an animal got hungry, occasionally went out and ate something. Well, that's doing that day and night. And I always identified not with the predator, but with the prey. I don't know, that's me. And it was awful. There was uneaten things everywhere, and I had a hard time. And I had a dream. And in my dream, my teacher Rudy was teaching, sitting on a platform like this, and he beckons for me to come up. And I stand up to approach him, and the moment I start to approach him, he goes, ah! Like this, and he turns into this huge animal, dog-like character. And I went like that. I was just like terrified, and it shut down completely. And then he turned back into Rudy and said, that's why you're not going to be a spiritual teacher. That's why you're no good. Because you react to what is. Because you got frightened, because you can't accept what is in front of you. Now, how do you not react to it? I had no idea. And And I was miserable. I was really miserable. And for the next 2 weeks in Africa, I kept bemoaning the fact that Rudy had rejected me, that I was no good, that I had failed at life, I had failed at dealing with the killing fields of Africa, that I was miserable. And I kept working and working and working to make peace with what was in Africa. And I had to look at the things around me and finally go, I can deal with this. I can accept this. I don't understand it, but I get it. This is what life is. This is what it always is. It's rough, it's tough, it's brutal, it's intense, and it is rich and it is joyful. It's all of this stuff. And I finally got to a place where I felt I get what Rudy was teaching. I just need a sign. I need a sign from Rudy that says, you got it, you're doing okay, everything is good. It's the 24th of January, which is Rudy's birthday. It's my last day in Africa. We're in a little shop in Nairobi where this woman is selling all these beads. And my wife is looking at them and they're beautiful. And I'm sitting there with a friend of mine who was once a student who was living in Nairobi and had taken us on safari in the Europe movie. And so I'm talking to him and I'm saying, this is my last day here and all I want so badly is for a sign from Rudy that I've grown and that I've learned the lesson of Africa. And at that moment, this German Shepherd comes charging at me from around the corner. Charging at me. And I just sat there, and the woman who runs the shop said, Rudy, get down.